Hello, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to our Thursday night whiskey tasting. Tonight, we are joined by Oliver Chilton of Elixir Distillers, and we're going to have a taste through the Port Askaig range of whiskies. I've got some whiskey here, which is nice. I'm Billy, I'm the Whisky Exchange's ambassador, and I'm also joined in the room by a variety of different people, including my colleague Gareth, and a whole host of people who have joined us in the Zoom room to have a tasting. For you folks out on Facebook, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. My colleague Gareth will be keeping an eye out, and we'll ask them in the room if we can. But other than that, we might as well just get on with it. So anyway, good evening, Oliver. Could you tell us about the wonders of Port Askaig, about yourself, and just give us an intro before we jump in and drink some whiskey?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Oliver Chilton. I work for Elixir Distillers. We're an independent bottler. So that means we buy casks of whiskey and bottle them. It's a really hard job. Essentially, it's the same as what you guys are doing with bottles, just a lot bigger. So really, it's just about scale. We hold around, say, 10,000 casks of whiskey all around Scotland, all different makes. But obviously, we do have a focus on Islay whiskey, and that all comes from the fact that we like it a lot. Specifically, my job is the buying of the whiskey, the tasting of the whiskey, the eventual mixing of it together with a big stick, and then afterwards selling it to people and talking about it. So I start by drinking it, and then I finish by drinking it too. It's not a bad job. Elixir Distillers, we've been around now as Elixir Distillers for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. But we're actually part of a wider company. So we're owned by Sukhinder Singh, the same guy who owns the Whisky Exchange. So this is a nice family call for me. I get to stare at Billy every day when it's not locked down. And essentially we're the hobby part of his company. So everyone else makes the money and we spend it. It's a wonderful world. Whereas I was actually speaking to someone today, a distiller, who said to me, the nicest thing about watching a business like ours grow is you go from Sukhinder being a collector to starting a shop online, very small, just him and his brother and his wives in the garage, to learning about selling whiskey, to then learning about distributing whiskey and then bottling whiskey, which is where we are. And then the plan eventually is to hopefully make whiskey, because obviously you just always got to look for that next thing. In terms of the whiskies we're drinking tonight, everything is Port Askaig, so that's Islay single malt whiskey. We started bottling Port Askaig in 2009, so 10 years ago, well, 11 years ago. Oh, time flies. And the idea was always to bottle kind of a gateway drug for Islay whiskey, but also a way of showing you that Islay whiskey isn't just peat smoke, it's also all the fruit, all the elegance, all the flavour that means that whenever you write down a list of top 20 distilleries in all the world, 8 of them currently will come from Islay. I have no doubt that'll be 9 when Arno finally releases whiskey. And it's not because they're all smoky, it's because they balance flavours. And what we're trying to do is select whiskies from across Islay and bottle them under the name Port Askaig as a way of introducing elegant styles. We don't put a distillery name on the bottle, but I will tell you which distilleries we've used for each bottling tonight, because we're in a nice private Zoom call that's being beamed to Facebook, so obviously no one's watching.
And recorded for posterity, and
yeah.
So private. Sorry, yeah, we're very special.
But essentially, we don't use the name of the distillery on the label, because originally we were buying, and we still do, we buy a lot of casks that don't have distillery names on. But also because for us, it's more about the style of the liquid than it is the distillery. So I'll kind of go into that as we try a few different things. Grand.
Well, shall we drink some whiskey then, Oliver?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. It must be at least a whole 2 minutes since your last dram. So anyway, moving on. So our first whiskey of the evening is going to be Port Askaig 8-year-old, is it not?
It is indeed. So we're going to start with the 8-year-old, which you should all have in your packs. This is kind of our introductory gambit. We released it originally about 5 years ago. It is 8 years old. So the youngest whiskey in that bottle is 8 years old. We use whiskey between 8 and 10. So sometimes there's some older liquid in there. And it's bottled at 45.8%. So 80 imperial proof. Old money. I'll come into that a bit later. Now, for us, this is a regular bottling. So we release this all the time. We try to keep it consistent as we can, but there are always changes. So I always say that there's no real consistent whiskey like regular whiskey. That doesn't actually exist. It's a horrible con, because you've always got changes in distillation, changes in maturation, and all of those things lead to subtle changes in your bottling. So what we do with 8-year-old is we'll do a batch of about 50 casks, give or take, that we'll move over to the bottling hall. We try each cask, and what we're looking for is that it fits the style. So in this case, 8-year-old we think of being quite soft, quite sweet, elegant. It's a word I'll use a lot tonight, but basically we were looking at those kind of more citrus-led flavors, smoky, absolutely. And we try and keep that consistency by using the same distillery in each batch. So in this case, it comes from the north coast of Islay, from a very large distillery, currently producing around 4 to 6 million litres of alcohol, called Elixir. And we're using that distillate because it's very sweet, soft. It suits this style. It's all matured in American oak. So it's all refill American oak. You'll notice in your glass, for those that are drinking it, it's very light in colour. The reason it's so light is that the wood's not very active. For me, that works very, very well for this spirit, because I could honestly drink Kalila off the still. I am petitioning to make it a drink. If I had my way, we would release that, just new make Kalila every day. There you go, Billy. Wow, you did that. You made that really big there on the screen. So yeah, it's very light, and that's basically because there's not vast amounts of wood interaction. The end result is that you get this very fresh, very clean whiskey. Now, as I say, we use about 50 casks in a batch. We use 50 casks for 2 reasons. One, my family's all from Yorkshire, right? And if we can save a penny, we will. So roughly speaking, it costs me about the same to move 50 casks as it does 40. So I worked out that if I moved, say, 65, that would cost me a lot more money. So it's good economies of scale. And then the other thing I worked out was that I could taste about 50 casks in an hour and a half. So as opposed to getting a sample drawn from every cask, which costs quite a lot of money to do, what we do is we'll move all the casks up to the bottling hall in one go. I fly up, open every single cask, taste them on site, try not to fall over, and then anything we don't think is the right style or quality, we take out, or anything that is truly exceptional, we also take out, because we might bottle as a single cask. We're an independent bottler at the end of the day, and that's our bread and butter. So what we're doing there is we're not looking to make it taste the same every time. So if you go out and buy a bottle of 8-year-old after trying this, it should taste very similar, but it might change up and down, because our vintages might change up and down. So sometimes we'll use majority 8-year-old, sometimes it'll be majority 9-year-old. And that's really dependent on our stocks and how many casks we were buying in any given year. I've spoken for a long time now. I'm really sorry.
Well, you're saying interesting things, so it's all fine. But so when it comes to the character of the whiskey, you're sort of saying about, you know, for that elegance, that bourbon sort of American oak forward type sort of character. What sort of things you expect to find in this sort of whiskey? Well, for this batch at least, this one we're trying.
So, I should say, Kalila as a make is incredibly consistent, which is why I like using it. So as a make and as a wood style, this is about as consistent as you get. I always find it to be quite lemony, almost like lemon oil, that freshness, that cleanness. So I definitely look for that. I also taste in colours. That sounds very weird, but when I taste, I see colours. I don't know if anyone else does that. I get kind of a lime green thing. So I kind of visualize it as being, again, that quite lighter. I think of it being lime green, but think of it being fresh. There is smoke, but the smoke is, for me, the peat smoke is very kind of, it's almost like barbecue or fire on the beach. So, and you're standing quite a way away from it. So it's the smoke is on the wind. You can almost taste the salt as well. God, that's all airy fairy, isn't it? Wow.
Well, it's tasty notes. This is, you're allowed to be airy fairy. It's one of the things I write quite a lot of. So, but for me, the big thing I always get is you're talking about those citrusy flavors, that lemon oil. I get big citrusy oil flavors. So definitely that. I get a lemon oil for this one specifically. I get like a very sort of orangey, sort of tangerine oil on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of sweetness as well. A lot more sweetness than you might expect. You know, it really young, zesty, sweet, and that smoke for me comes through almost like not black licorice, but licorice root, like burning licorice root. Which I have a bag of licorice root in my cupboard, and I do occasionally set fire to it because it smells quite nice.
There's a natural sweetness to the spirit. So if you do try the new make, and I'm not going to tell either Gareth or Billy where it is because they're both closer to the office than me, but I've got a big jug of it in the office. It is distinctly sweet, and maybe that kind of licorice where you've got that mixture of bitter sweet probably ties in quite well. That's where I think that comes from. It doesn't, for us, like for particularly for 8-year-old and 100 proof, we're not using any first fill bourbon, so we're not getting that sweetness from the wood. A lot of people describe vanillins and those kind of richer, sweeter flavors as being American oak bourbon character. For me, this is all distillate led. There is a wood character to it. It's that slight dryness you get, but I don't think the sweetness is necessarily driven from wood, but for me anyway.
It definitely feels like you say that you taste the spirit. And I know this is one of the things you and I have spoken about in the past, is that you don't want to hide necessarily. Sometimes you might want to, but you don't want to hide the character of that new make spirit. You want it to change, and you want to be able to taste the distillery. And this whiskey you definitely can. Well,
so for me, whiskey almost falls into two camps. And we actually have two different labels that we bottle under for exactly that reason. So for single casks, we'll bottle under Single Malts of Scotland, or we'll bottle under Whiskey Trail. And Single Malts of Scotland, all those whiskies, similar to this, they're distillate led. The character is led by spirit. And Whiskey Trail tends to be more wood led, and that's only because wood is a wonderful thing and it creates wonderful flavors, but it can cover up certain characters. And I'm a great believer that the most magical part of whiskey creation is the creation of flavor in frankly large factories. But how people are manipulating those large factories to make flavors. And one of the examples I always give is if you compare Kalila to its sister distillery Lagavulin, they're essentially using the same ingredients, right? So you've got these two big, well, Kalila's very big, Lagavulin's of a reasonable size. And they're both using essentially the same malt peak levels, roughly about the same. They go up and down. They're using the same yeast strains, so they're both using essentially a kind of traditional distiller's yeast, and they're both using Islay water. So all the ingredients are the same. The only real difference in the whiskies is the production method, and there's kind of two or three key points that they make a difference. So with Kalila, they fill their stills very low. You end up with a lot more headroom, so you get a lot more what they call reflux, which is essentially where heavier compounds are dropping down. Lagavulin fill their stills very high, so you get all those heavier compounds. Those heavier compounds create flavors that, I mean, I always think of meat, right? So Lagavulin for me tastes like smoky bacon, or frazzles. It's just big, meaty, heavy whiskey, and in the spirit you can taste that. It's quite it's almost like thinking colors. It's the other side. It's that dark mossy green. Whereas Kalila, because they've got so much reflux, it's much lighter. They also have I believe they've got a slightly finer cut on their cut point. So because they cut slightly higher, again, you miss out some of those heavier, particularly phenols. So phenols carry a lot of heavy, robust flavors. And that production difference in distillation makes a difference to the whiskey, biggest difference to the spirit for me, more than wood. And we're trying to capture, with Port Askaig, we're trying to capture a particular style in terms of that more elegant, sweeter style. So I could probably never really use, I think we've only managed to find one cask of Lagavulin that we thought was right for Port Askaig, and we bottled it for Taiwan. Outside of that, and that had a lot of wood impetus on it. In terms of spirit character, it's definitely less so.
Yeah, well, like I say, this is, for me, I've been writing about and trying Port Askaig for many years, and when it comes to sort of like, an entry point to sort of show you the idea of the range, this one's always been my favorite because it really does have that bright, fresh, zesty thing. Andrew Gudgeon in the Zoom chat just popped up saying that when you add water, the lime scent really comes through. And drop of water for these is always great, just like helps sort of like, It's like cause them to sort of burst out the glass a bit, especially these younger ones.
Yeah, so I mean, it's 45.8, so there's certainly room to add water. It's we bottle at that strength for a couple of reasons. One, we thought it sounded nice. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But you know, I'd love to give you a really good marketing reason, but we don't have one.
It sounds nice. It's the best marketing reason of all, Oliver.
Yeah, at least it's honest, right? So there you go. Two, it is the old 80 proof, so there's a nice tie in there for us with the whiskey we're going to try afterwards. And then the main reason is that it allows you to be non-chill filtered and no colouring. So if you do add water to this whiskey, it probably will go a bit cloudy. It will haze in the glass, because when you don't chill filter, you're basically leaving in fats, and those fats, when you add water, come together and you can see them in the glass. Now, we leave, as a rule, as a company, we don't chill filter anything, because I'm quite a big guy, for those that can't see. I like fats, right? Butter's a wonderful thing. They create texture. It's the same as in food, okay? So you want textures in whiskey. For me, that's really important. It's a really important part of the drinking experience. The other thing is, if you chill filter, it rips out colour. And for those that have got a glass of this, you can see there's no colour in it. So if we ripped out any more, you'd be drinking water, which is why a lot of
not particularly dark, the 8-year-old. So
no, absolutely. But we always think to ourselves, it's probably okay. Our customers are normally quite interested in whiskey, so they'll forgive us the lack of colour for good flavour. Actually, to the point where I didn't used to write it on the bottle. It was actually pointed out to me about 2 years ago, that we should probably start telling people what we do. I find it's odd. Scotch whisky is the only industry in the world, or the only product in the world I can think of, which notoriously you have to say what you don't do. You always have to tell people the things you haven't done, which is a very strange world to live in.
No chill filtering, no added colour, no doing strange things with casks, Yes. No, so when it comes to sort of like a straight down the line Islay whiskey, showing exactly what you're trying to do, 8 is an excellent place to start. But a place to start. Should we move on to another whiskey?
Absolutely. So the next whiskey we're going to try is the 100 proof. We're doing 10-year-old first.
No, we'll do 100 proof. I picked up the wrong bottle. Sorry, I changed the order when I moved them around. I'm a professional.
So we're going to do 100 proof, because we like to throw you in at the deep end. So for those that are worried, this is not 100% alcohol. This is 100 imperial proof, which is a wonderful measurement of alcohol. 57.1%. The maths is dreadful. So to give you an idea, 40% would be 70 proof, 45.8 is 80 proof, and 57.1 is 100 proof. We use that strength because we like a little bit of consistency in our labeling. If you call something cask strength post 2013, it has to actually be cask strength. That makes a lot of sense, but pre 2013 that wasn't the case. So in a lot of ways, this was the first whiskey we ever bottled in the Port Askaig. So our original release in 2009 was a cask strength whiskey at 57.1%, and it was young, 7 to 10-year-old whiskey. This is exactly the same. So it's 7 to 10-year-old Islay single malt whiskey from the same distillery as 8-year-old at 57.1% ABV. For those that don't know and might be interested, the proof systems are a fantastic one for stories. They are mostly and entirely rubbish. So anyone who listens to this after the fact, please know that I'm talking rubbish, but it's really good. So I'm going to tell you anyway. The origins of proof almost certainly did come out of the fact of adding alcohol to gunpowder, almost certainly. But what they would do is they'd add alcohol to gunpowder, they'd set light to it, and if it set light, it was above proof, over proof, and if it didn't set light, it was under proof, because essentially that is the only measurement you've got. You've either got a light or you don't. The measurement of proof is shrouded in mystery, but there's some lovely stories around it. My favorite is that there's 2 different proof systems. So there might be some people on here who are aware of the US proof system, where 100 proof would be 50%. So they just half it, very easy. I love the story that they used to use French gunpowder in the US and British gunpowder, obviously here. And and mainly because they hated us, because they obviously wanted their independence. I always like to say that, you know, the US, they used French gunpowder for checking strength. They also used it for their bullets. They won the War of Independence. We no longer have their tax money, which is a massive shame. Could really do with it during coronavirus, obviously. But however, we do get higher alcohol. So rubbish gunpowder is good for one thing. It's good for higher ABV. So almost certainly rubbish, but please repeat it. It's a wonderful story.
Well, I looked into the real reason why the US have their proof system. I had a very, very long night of reading the articles of Congress on the government websites in the US, 3 or 4 hours of reading through years and years of this. And the reason why is because they decided that they would do it. And there is no actual reason behind it at all. They just literally decided it one day. Your story is much better, and I'm going to tell that one from now on.
We learned 2 things there, Billy. One, you don't have a 3.5-year-old in your house, because you would never be able to do that with a child in your house. Never, not in a million years. You invent stories for children. That's what I do. Whiskey stories. It's much easier than rolled up. Okay. 100 proof whiskey, similar to the one before, because you're similar make, similar style. So you might still get all those citrus notes that you got. They tend to be dialed up a little bit. It's really interesting, theoretically speaking, when you add water to peaty whiskey, it should get sweeter, okay? Because phenols carry glucose and they hate water, so they tend to separate and release sugars, and you get more sweetness in your whiskey. That's a lovely theory. Myself and one of the guys who works with me, Katie, she said she always finds 100 proof sweeter. Always. She says it always comes across as sweeter. Don't have a particularly good reason for that. It just seems to be that way. It seems to present as a slightly sweeter whiskey. The other thing I find about this whiskey for me is, although it's 57.1%, it is infinitely drinkable. Dangerous is probably the exact term for it. And that's because it's a very light spirit, so you don't have all of those kind of heavier notes that maybe make it more challenging. Because it's such a light spirit, even at high ABV, it's really approachable. I hope. Some people might not agree. I'm looking around the Zoom chat to find somebody going, it's not approachable, I'm dying. But no, everyone's smiling, so it's okay.
It is. It's one of these ones where high ABV, just due to the nature of water and alcohol mixtures, I go on and on about these a lot in tastings and things, but the whole thing is that higher ABV doesn't necessarily mean spikier and things like that. Just the way that alcohol is expressed is all down to the way the whiskey's been made, the way that it's been diluted, the way it's sat in the bottle, phase of the moon, color of the distiller's socks, you know, all the normal things that heavily affect whiskies. But this one definitely, we managed to sort of like, you know, keep this going at this sort of thing of being scarily approachable for a 100 proof whiskey.
Yeah. It is, so it doesn't come out at 57.1, it comes out. Normally these batches come out around 58.5-ish, 59%. They range quite a lot because the age range has changed significantly over the years. So when we launched 100 proof, or relaunched 100 proof in 2015, we were bottling pretty much exclusively 7-year-old whiskey. But we kind of keep back a little bit of stock each year. And then we had a bit of a gap. So in 2011 stock, I did a wonderful purchase. It was brilliant. I bought a lot of stock that year, and it turned up in butts. Now this might sound odd, because you might think to yourself that independent bottlers go around warehouses and point at casks and say, I want that one. But sadly, it doesn't work like that. Normally you get a spreadsheet. It's really not as beautiful or as romantic as it should be. You get a spreadsheet and it's got a nice big figure on it that says like 10,000 litres. And then afterwards, after you've agreed to that and paid the money, they send you another sheet and it says which casks you got. And normally you've had an agreement that you know what you're going to get. And normally we get, when we're buying kind of aged stock for this make, we'll get 250 litre hogsheads. But in 2011, as luck would have it, we managed to get, I think, 2/3 of the stock in sherry butts. Now, individually, they are wonderful things, and we've released a couple of them and blended a couple of them and had a lot of fun with them. However, they're not so good if you've got a consistent style that you're aiming for, and suddenly, for one particular year, 2/3 of your stock doesn't work anymore. So what we ended up doing was basically taking out 2011. So for the last 2 years, 100 proof has been getting steadily older and more 10-year-old than 7-year-old. This will be the first year that we can start looking at using more 7-year-old again. So again, that it will change. It's not, we're not looking for it to change massively. It won't, it's not going to be completely different whiskey, but there will be batch variation.
So about how often do you put out one of these batches?
So we are now doing 2 or 3 a year. 2 or 3 years. So we've just done a batch of 8-year-old, which, being frank, is the first time I haven't tried all the casks. So it was done in the middle of coronavirus. So I got a sample sent to me, and I'd actually said to the guys I was going to put a note on it. So if it turned out that you got some kind of random cask in the middle of it, we just put a badge on it saying coronavirus batch. But as it happens, it's not changed at all, which is good for me. Happy days. The reason I say that is, Billy, can I share a picture? Is that all right?
Yeah, if you want to.
You just have to remind me to take it off the screen, okay? So because I left it up last time.
Okay.
I'll show you something. This kind of gives you a really good indication of why we feel it's important to check the cast.
Oh yes, I think I know what you're going to do. Also, everybody, please put up with Oliver's incredibly clunky mouse noises whenever he clicks on anything.
Sorry.
I've been trying to get him to buy a mouse, but for some reason he won't. He keeps on muttering about being from Yorkshire. Okay,
so try to ignore the background image, because that's the bottling hall, and it's not as beautiful as you think it would be. This is a cask that was actually for a batch of 100 proof. So when we moved it on the paperwork, it said hogshead, refill hogshead. And when we turned up at the bottling hall, we lay out all the casks on the road outside, basically. And I'll walk down the lot and open every single cask. And while we were walking down, myself and the manager of the bottling hall noticed that 2 of the casks were slightly longer than all the others. So we turned them around and we scraped away a bit of paint. And we found out that underneath they said Gonzalez and Bias, which is a sherry producer, for those that don't know. And there was a sudden realization, these are not American oak hogsheads. These are, turned out, no, sorry for the clunky mouse, stop sharing. Turned out that these were bought sometime probably in the early 90s, maybe before. One of the guys I know at Diageo is actually retired now. He was an ex-blender. He told me that they were called half butts, and they were bought on the cheap. So they were bought as part of a parcel at the time that happened to be available. Bear in mind, this is 30 odd years ago, when nobody really thought that we'd be discussing the exact wood policy of every distiller. That wasn't a conversation anyone was going to have. So they bought these casks, they used them, they've then refilled them a few times, and in the ether, because they hold roughly 250 litres, they've been renamed refill hogsheads. And we got very lucky to end up with both of them. So I had to take those out of the batch because they were distinctly darker. They were very different character. We actually bottled both of them as single casks, one for Single Malts of Scotland, and one we very kindly gave to the Whisky Exchange, because if I don't, my boss will shoot me.
Thank you. I got to pour it at the Whisky Show. It was a fantastic dram.
Yeah, and it's one of the lovely things about being an independent bottler and actually being this small, is that you can look for a parcel of, well, that one's very different. But if you just look on the paperwork, you would never have seen it. So that's why we insist on checking each cask. That, and it's quite fun for me. So.
Yeah, but I say it's one of those things that people often will say. It's such an incredible job, so much fun you must have walking on a line of 50 casks in the rain.
Yeah, do bear in mind it's outside.
Yeah, in the borders of Scotland on an industrial estate. It's not quite so romantic some of the time.
It's Glasgow, so it's not too bad. I go to the pot still afterwards for a pint, so I'm normally fine.
Well, thank you very much for your sacrifice, Oliver. So, anyway, shall we move on to another whiskey?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Right. So, what are we up to next?
We're going to do 10-year-old, our 10th anniversary. That's the one.
Yeah, just going to show everybody what it is. Here we go. There we go. That is the Port Askaig 10th anniversary 10-year-old. Magic.
So we're going to do, this is our 10th anniversary from last year, because we're obviously 11 this year. We've not done an 11-year-old because we decided to be more creative this year. We're releasing a 12-year-old. Might as well skip a year. So obviously the label Port Askaig has been bottled for 11 years now. Last year being our 10th anniversary. In the last kind of 3-4 years, we've always done, I guess it's a limited release. So a batch that's normally kind of 5,000 to 10,000 bottles. That doesn't sound very limited, but it's relatively small. We used to, way back when, certainly when Billy and I were still in a small enough company that we messed around on this on the side of our actual jobs. We used to bottle Port Askaig as a limited release all the time. We just didn't tell anyone. And it was only pointed out to me that it was limited when we kept selling out of stuff. And I'd be like, I'll just replace it with something different. And they said, you should probably tell people it's limited. And I sat there for a long time going, well, you know, still, they can probably buy it somewhere in Taiwan. So anyway, we started doing this more organized approach to bottling and saying this is a limited release and we do one a year. And in 2018, we started working on the one for the 10th anniversary. We thought it was sensible to do a 10-year-old. Now, a few years before that, we'd actually vatted up some of the Lila that we were using for 100 proof, and we'd recast it into sherry butts. We'd recast some into sherry butts, some into bourbon barrels. Some of the sherry butts we'd used for that recasting were ex-Solera casks. This was very much a passion project. It was something Sukhinder wanted to do. He was really interested in it. I found out afterwards that no one in the Scotch whisky industry in their right mind uses Solera butts, so butts that were used in the production of sherry. Most of the casks used in the Scotch whisky industry are made for us. They're made for Scotch whisky. So you go to a cooper or a sherry producer and you will buy wood sometimes years in advance. So you'll say, I want this wood. They will fill the sherry into the wood for you. They will store it for you and they will make it to your specification. The reason they do this is it's really consistent. It makes really good casks. Solera systems last for sometimes up to 70 years, so 50 to 70 years. So if you buy a cask that was used in a Solera system, it's old, like really, really old. We didn't realize quite what that meant until we bought them. We filled the casks. We found out that a lot of them were essentially sieves. So that cost us quite a lot of whiskey. That was a good day. So we had to have some of them recoopered. And then the flavor profile was completely different. So everyone, when they think of sherry matured whiskey, you think of quite sweet, rich flavors. You think of those kind of fruit cake, Christmas cake flavors. Solera casks give you this kind of mushroomy, dark, dank wood floor flavor. They don't have that sweetness to them. So we had these casks put to one side that were coming to 10 years of age. We also had some bourbon barrels. And the conclusion we came to is we needed to use the bourbon barrels to bring in sweetness into these Solera casks. So we started messing around with blending. And I say we because it was myself and my entire team, all three of us at the time. So Andrew is my ops manager and Katie, who does all our sales. And the three of us sat in a room and we came up with, I think, about a dozen different blends. And each time we ended up using quite a big quantity of refill wood, what we use for 100 proof. So this now, the one you're tasting 10-year-old, the end blend was 15% sherry, I think it was, 15% sherry, 25% bourbon, and then the remainder was refill American oak. And the idea was to layer up flavors. So you would get that kind of dank, mushroomy, dark, deep flavors as a base, and then you'd put this sweeter, richer, bourbon-led flavors above, and then that fresh, clean, essentially Kalila flavor that we love, that makes up the bulk of the whiskey, and that gives you that cleanness to the palate. This was a lot of fun for me because it was proper blending, proper messing around, and at the end of the day, we're hobbyists, right? We're enthusiasts. We're enthusiasts with a big wallet and a boss who says, "Yeah, go on, give it a go, see what happens." And I must have we spent quite a lot of time just the sweetener. And I mentioned this because I mentioned water earlier. And I was doing all this research into what water does to whiskey, water in wood, water in dilution. So one of the things we decided to do is reduce it by just 2%. So we dropped the alcohol by. So you'll see on your bottle, if you got one, there's 55.85%. The reason it's got 2 digits is because my sales manager, Katie, thought she is hilarious. And she noticed that the coordinates for Port Askaig is 55.85 something, 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 something. We thought it was a nice nod. And it just happened that I was reduced by I say, I should point out, we try everything. We try everything with water. So quite a lot of stuff we will reduce because we think it tastes better. I genuinely think my job as an independent bottler is to put the best thing in a bottle that people to enjoy. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not think it's nicer with a bit more water, or that you might think it was nicer if it had been left alone. But I can't predict what everyone's going to think. What I can do is say, this is what I think is really good. So that's what we did. Hopefully you're enjoying a slightly richer, more layered whiskey than the ones that came before it. My hope is that I think given our casking program, we're probably another year to 2 years away from where we can make a whiskey like this kind of regular in our lineup.
It's definitely got a little bit more of a bit more body to it. The others, it's got that back end of richness. On the previous one, on the 100 proof, Andrew from the Zoom chat was saying that it was quite creamy and it's got sort of like a fruit cakey sort of note appears on the palate. But this one definitely has that little bit more in there from those different casks you're bringing in.
Yeah. So it was about, I think we did about, I think it was about 12,000 bottles in all. I can't remember the exact cask breakdown of that. Well, I'm just doing one that's basically 50-50 on sherry and bourbon. I think it's about 20 casks, give or take. But yeah, we ended up using a small amount of the sherry, and we did keep that. So we're actually using it this year because I also, at the same time, we loaded in some sherry butts from Miguel Martin, who's a fantastic cooper in Spain, makes wood for the likes of Glenfarclas, Kilhoman, but 3. I'm sure Billy know far more than I do about the other people he coopers for. But we loaded those on, and if one of the most interesting things for me, and if we ever get to do this all in person, I will bring both styles because they're really interesting to see the difference the two of wood make to the whiskey, and also show you the difference between kind of modern sherry, modern whiskey, and the used very old used casks and the difference that would bring.
Because it's one of my obsessions is this whole thing about casks in general, but specifically sherry casks. If anybody's interested in seeing a man write significantly too much about sherry casks, Ollie and I years ago went out to go and see Miguel Martin and learn all about this. And I wrote up my trip and wrote up history of sherry casks. And that misconception about sherry casks being these Solera casks, which are such weird things and so unlike what people think of as a sherry cask. And the modern sherry cask is just basically a much more consistent version of what they used to use back in the sort of 70s and sort of 60s and before. But that thing is, you get that, still having that chance there to get those Solera casks, because I stated categorically many times that nobody in the whiskey industry used Solera casks. And one day I said this somewhere near Ollie's earshot, and he said, well, I've got some, making me look like a complete idiot, which I was very appreciative of. So it's nice to actually see that we're actually getting these casks in. So, Ollie, are you still there? You seem to have gone very still. Oliver, I think we might have lost Ollie, I'm afraid. Right. Ollie's gone away for a little bit. So, hello, Gareth. If anybody's got any, yeah, Ollie's actually just dropped off the call. If anybody's got any questions, now is probably the time to ask if there are things I can answer. If not, we may have to sort of jump onto the next whiskey and see what we think. So, Gareth, do we have any questions from your end? You seem to have gone quiet again. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. We have not
What?
on Facebook.
Okay, that's right. Anyway, so we've gone through the 8 and the 10 and the 100 proof so far. We've got a couple more whiskies to go through. Gareth, do you want to drop Ollie a line and see if his internet's fallen off the planet? So,
Yeah, he's
there
just
we go.
messaged.
Oh, he's just messaged me. He's come back again. Where's he gone? Here he is. Ollie, you're back.
But you didn't hear me.
No, there we go. No, your internet kept on warning me that you're about to disappear. Anyway, you're back. Hooray. So, 100 proof. Do you have any, or shall we move on to another whiskey?
10-year-old. Put me on 10-year-old.
Oh, 10-year-old, sorry, yeah.
Right, I'm with it.
Oh, I have someone with a hand up. Give me a second and I will have a question for you, Oliver. There you go, Simon. I think I've just unmuted you. Hello.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's a cleaning your palate between the tasting, because I'm, just following one on from another one and pretty much getting the same, basically.
Water is definitely your friend. I drink pints of it. I was once told it's actually good for you as well. I would definitely wash out your glass, especially for this tasting towards the end. If you want to run away and get a pint of water now, it's worthwhile, because the last whiskey is different to the first four. But yeah, I just use water. I think the only thing that I've ever been told works really well is coffee in terms of smell, or smell the back of your hand. That definitely works. Reset your senses. But just water works very well. Gargle lots. All of these whiskies are relatively light, so you tend not, with this kind of style of whiskey, you tend not to have such a big problem in terms of resetting your palate. It's more the kind of big, heavy sherry bombs that really bother you. I know I've had the privilege to be in Kurosawa for the last, whatever it is, 6 years, 7 years, and each time you taste that, it's quite painful.
Excellent. I have another question for you, Oliver. If you give me a second. There we go. There we go. Hello.
Hello, hi. So my question is, do you have like a dream kind of distillery or a dream cask that you'd really like to get their stuff or get their cask and work with?
We've been pretty fortunate in terms of cask owning, but I mean, look, from a whiskey enthusiast point of view, absolutely, because I would love to have casks of Longmorn 69 sitting in stock, because it's probably the most wonderful whiskey I've ever tasted in my life. I'd love to have old Bowmores. I mean, all of that 60s, 70s, or even 50s distillate from a massive range of distilleries, much like the last one we're going to try, is so full of character and distillate character, so full of fruit. For me, it would be a dream to be able to bottle those kind of casks. In terms of getting our hands on modern day distillers, it's funny, it's not easy, but there's most of the things that I truly love. Like, as an example, I love Ben Nevis. I would drink Ben Nevis every day until I fell over. But I've been fortunate enough to be in a position that we could buy quite a lot of Ben Nevis. So, and luckily my boss also likes Ben Nevis. So often the conversation is, how much am I allowed to buy? And the answer is, however much you can get your hands on, which is why I ended up buying, I think it was about 250 casks of 2018. That made me very happy in about 10 years' time. In terms of Islay stock, nowadays it's a lot more difficult. So back when Secunda started buying casks, you could buy Ardbeg, buy Lefroy, you could buy more, you could buy Port Ellen. I mean, when I started selling whiskey, which was 15 years ago, we were selling Port Ellen for £80 a bottle. It was hard work, if you can believe it. So there was a lot of stock around. Nowadays, buying Ardbeg, buying Lefroy, for more for money that that someone's willing to pay for it to drink is actually quite hard. So in the modern world, it would probably be those distilleries. I love modern Bowmore. I think like Bowmore post 2000 is magical. Bowmore in the 90s is magical. I love that style of stock. It is very difficult to find now. And Ardbeg similarly. I love. I think Billy and I were talking about this the other day. even standard 10-year-old Ardbeg is probably one of my go-to whiskies at the moment. So I think Mickey Heads has just done such a fabulous job as distiller. He's made such a fantastic spirit.
Their ongoing problem is just the fact that their 10-year-old is so good, their special releases have difficulty living up to it.
Yeah, and part of the problem there is that Islay whiskey is a lot more popular, which 15 years ago, I think if you told a lot of people that when I started, that Islay whiskey would be this incredibly popular sought after whiskey, they wouldn't have believed you. I remember the first time talking to kind of brand ambassadors in the shop, they would tell you, oh, well, it's kind of like a triangle. In fact, I think that was a DCL Diageo's original method. It was this pyramid scheme that you eventually reached Lagavulin and only a few people would like it. The reality is actually the opposite. Certainly in the UK, we like smoky food. I don't know about everyone on this group, but you probably eat salamis, smoked meats, smoked, barbecued vegetables, all of these kind of big smoky flavors. So it's not surprising that actually a lot of people do like Islay whiskey. And to add to that, when you look at things like Port Askaig, it's a really complex. All the whiskies from Islay are really complex in terms of their levels of fruit. And I go back to one of the most memorable tastings I ever had, which was actually just standing in a shop I was working in 14 years ago, and we were pouring Islay whiskey on the day for people to taste. And someone came up, two guys came to the shop. They shotted a dram of Lefroy Cask Strength. They both banged their chest in this kind of way, which was slightly depressing. And then this woman who came in, and she was no more than like 4'6". She was really diddy. And she took a sip and she looked at me. She goes, "God, isn't it romantic?" And I said, "Yeah, that is a much better descriptor. It is romantic. There's so much flavour. It's like being on the beach. It's so full of smoke. It's so full of, you think, when I think back to that, I think Islay whiskey is always going to appeal to people because the flavours are romantic. It takes you somewhere. It's always going to appeal to a massive amount of people. Sadly, for me as a whiskey buyer, that means it's more difficult to purchase. So nowadays, I guess in modern whiskey, I wish I could buy more Bowmore. I wish I could buy more Ardbeg. I wish I could buy more Lefroy. I wish I could buy more Kilchoman. I'm pretty sure I can buy as much as I like. I just have to bottle it with them. I wish I could buy more Kilchoman.
We do have the rare honour that the Elements of Islay range, which you look after as well, is one of, I do believe, 3 independent bottlers who have ever been allowed to bottle Kilchoman.
Yeah, we're also the reason that no one else is allowed to, because it was so popular. KH1, when we did it, was so popular. Anthony Wills got more phone calls from independent bottlers asking to buy casks. They phoned us up after and said, "I'm never doing it again." All right.
I'm very. That was the first whiskey I ever worked on. So yes, I still have a bottle of it somewhere. It's very nice. I remember that. The demonstration of how easy the independent bottler's job was. I was given 2 samples and told to choose which one was best. I chose the best one and we bottled it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your job's easy, Ollie.
No, it is, because I had that conversation with Mark Watt, who's starting his own independent bottling label at the moment, Watt's Whiskies. And something we were both laughing about was the amount of people who think our job is sitting in a room, tasting something, writing masses of notes, considering it. It's not. It's sitting in a room, tasting something. That's nice. Bottle it. That's nice. But I mean, you can plow through samples quite quickly on that philosophy. Really, the job is just recognizing your own palate, recognizing what you like, and what makes you happy, and then going back to them afterwards. And then you have to do some work and write notes and whatnot, or you give them to Billy. But the job of finding whiskies, it's joyous, it's wonderful. Honestly, it's brilliant, and it's very easy. The complexities are all to do with the business side and the bottling side, and sometimes the marketing side, which I loathe. As if anyone from my marketing is watching, I'm really sorry, but I can't stand what you do. It drives me crazy.
They all are. They're all on Facebook. I saw them all pop up. Don't worry.
Good. Hello, everybody. That side I find really hard work. But trying whiskey and saying it's nice, that's easy.
Shall we drink some more whiskey, Oliver? I think we should definitely move on. So we're going to move on to the Port Askaig 28.
Yeah.
Cool. I noticed a couple of people have already started on it. So Andrew Gudgeon in the Zoom room, who's been giving us tasting notes all night, it turns out it's his 55th birthday. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday. So this is a great example of what we just said, actually, because obviously with a lot of casks, when you're buying them, you know what the make is. And a lot of my job actually is understanding different makes, understanding how they've changed, different vintages of those makes, because vintage is definitely a thing in whiskey, even if it's not widely disclosed. It, you know, any given year, things change at a distillery and that changes how they taste. When we bought this stock, when we bought these casks, and we still got quite a few of them, we bought them as Islay single malt whiskey. They did not have a distillery name on. So that means that you don't have any preconceptions. It is literally what is in the glass is what you've got to go on. So unlike the other whiskies in the lineup, I can't actually tell you which distillery this comes from because I don't know. However, I can tell you what I think it is, and I think that's fair because I will. I've obviously in my relatively short life drank copious amounts of whiskey. One of my favorite things, and I know Billy's favorite things, is 80s and 90s distillate from Lefroy, because it's so distinctly fruit driven. You get, in some of them, you get bananas, like really distinct bananas, almost like barbecued bananas, and you get massive amounts of verging on tropical fruit as well. Lefroy is always known for these kind of big phenolic peaty drams, but actually, again, it's more about the fruits than it is the phenols. And often the kind of smoke supports everything else. For me, this has too much medicinal character to be from the North Coast. So for me, it doesn't fit into that Kalila style. It tastes like a slightly more medicinal dram, but it does have piles of fruit and a softness to it that when I drink it, I think of those like 10-year-old Lefroy bottled mid-90s. For me, it fits into that character. But I should stress, I don't know that, and that's just me speaking from my own experience. And there might be people on this Zoom call who go, oh, well, actually, to me, it tastes like X, or it tastes like Y. And the great thing about this is it's all valid, but the only thing that really matters is, does it taste nice? Which I hope it does, because I love this. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Definitely that, talking about that Lefroy character, I have a load of bottles on my shelf of late 1990s 10-year-old, which I bought at auction, and which my former colleague Tim Forbes wrote a whole sort of love letter to on our blog. Unfortunately, Tim told too many people that it was really good, and the price went up and up and up and up, and I can't afford it anymore. But yeah, this just feels like that with more of that going on, more layers.
Yeah.
So fruity, and it's got that whole sort of tropical citrus type thing going on, almost sort of. It's almost, I must say, this is one of my newer tasting notes now. I've actually tried it. This is almost sort of diving into sort of yuzu and that sort of Japanesey sort of like lime and mandarin combination thing, which is one of my favorite things in the world. So thank you very much for including this one in the tasting, mate.
Yeah, it's a wonderful whiskey. I mean, the great thing, and it is becoming more prevalent. So Scotch whisky now, so when the example I always give is 15 years ago, I remember reading that single malt was about 2% of the total market share for Scotch whisky. Nowadays, they reckon it's 12. That's a big change. And what that means is that marketing departments and lawyers care a lot more about the branding for single malt whisky distilleries, which is perfectly understandable. So you are finding a lot more blended malt being traded. You're finding a lot more malt without a distillery name. And distilleries do it to protect what they see as their asset, so that they see the brand as their asset. And that's fine. The flip side is that it's cheaper, right? So if you went into the market and tried to buy 28-year-old Kalila, 28-year-old Lefroy, 28-year-old Ardbeg, you would pay a fortune. You know, you'd be lucky if you'd ever see your money back. However, the great thing about buying it without a name is they don't charge you as much. So it means that I can bottle a 28-year-old Islay whiskey, which is, for me, sublime in terms of style, for what I hope is not a too unreasonable price. So it's around the £300 mark.
Can't remember the exact price, but Ollie, I've got a question for you. from Andrew, the birthday boy. Does aging in the cask soften the character of the whiskey? Because in this one, you're saying they seem a little bit more subtle than the previous ones.
Absolutely. Maturation is a really funny thing because it's not as straightforward as one, it's often described, and two, as you would like. So I remember seeing various curves that you'd have these upward trajectory curves of flavour being impacted on the whiskey, and then it would level off, and essentially you'd get wood. In reality, maturation is more of a wave. So what you get over time is you get evaporation, where you're losing alcohol, and that definitely softens up any whiskey. You get the addition of flavours, so you get the addition of wood flavours. There are lots of compounds in wood that go into your whiskey, including phenols. So, we've spoken a lot about, I've mentioned phenols a lot. It's an integral part of peaty whiskey, but you get wood phenols as well. So you get smoky flavours from wood, essentially. You obviously get sugars from wood. You also get where flavour compounds are changing. So where they're reacting with different compounds in the wood, or they're reacting with oxygen. I realised the Scotch Whisky Research Institute denies this. Well, there you go. I'm going to join them next year, so have a deep conversation about it. Oxygen definitely makes a difference to whiskey, in my opinion, because I've seen the difference it makes in low fill casks versus high fill casks. And all of those interactions, it's all chemistry, which I'm not a chemist. I don't know the backbone of it. Billy and I have a friend who's very good at it. But all of those interactions mean that you've got forever changes in flavour. So you tend to get phenols like those peaty notes tend to drop off. They dissipate over time. You get replaced by other phenols. They get replaced by other wood flavours. But you will also then get other changes throughout. So other fruit flavours being delivered. One of the best examples I can give of this is a friend of mine who has a fantastic distillery and makes a fantastic whiskey, Zuidam in the Netherlands, Patrick van Zuidam. If you've not tried his rye whiskey, you have not lived. It's wonderful. Patrick matured some stock from 1996. He distilled it, and he matured it for his entire life in virgin oak. And everybody in Scotland was saying at the time, "Oh, you couldn't do that. You get too much wood; it'll overpower it." Patrick did it, and it ended up, what he said is the curve on virgin oak was you ended up delivering, suddenly certain notes started dropping off, you started delivering peach. So you got rid of all of those kind of nail varnishy notes that you associated with virgin oak. Those all dissipated after about 15 years, and then they got replaced by fruit flavors, which were possibly in the distillate to start with, but were only showing through much later on after other compounds had disappeared, which gave it this kind of peach fruit. And it is one of my favorite whiskies. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's a fantastic example of maturation. You definitely lose whiskies which make things softer, but you also get additional flavors, or you reveal flavors that were there all the time.
If anybody wants to just have a mad scientist look into the wonderful world of whiskey in general, then have a look at Patrick's stuff, because the Zuidam stuff in general is just a little bit crazy. If you ever get a chance to go to a tasting with them as well, last time I heard of one, I missed the beginning and didn't make it, but it turned into almost a hostage situation as he just brought out more and more different incredible distillates that people needed to try, and everybody came out looking slightly scared of the universe. Fantastic spirit. But should we move on to our last whiskey, Oliver?
Yeah, absolutely. So to Simon earlier, big glass of water, because this is very different. We bottled this, I think, 2015. So it's been in bottle for a little while now.
So what is this, Ollie? Do you want to tell the world?
It's Port Askaig 45-year-old.
There we go.
Is that what you're looking for? Kind of the big moment.
Yeah. You said the words now. It's all good.
Unlike Billy, I don't have a bottle of this. That's not technically true, but I don't have a bottle open. I've got a sample. So.
This is, I do believe, the Ollie may actually have more in his sample bottle than there is in this. This is the remains of the special bottle we have in the office.
So this was bottled quite a few years ago, and it was all our remaining casks of this particular whiskey. So it is 45 years of age. It was distilled in 1968. It was distilled at Bunnahabhain Distillery which is on the north coast of Islay. It's unpeated. So Bunnahabhain closed their floor maltings around 1960. They were buying mainland malt. Peated malt wasn't made industrial on Islay till 73, 74, I think it is, sometime early 70s. And so essentially this is all unpeated stock. So there's no smoke here. Hence I say big glass of water. But what you are tasting is kind of a point in time. So this predates distiller's yeast. I think I mentioned that earlier. Distiller's yeast was a specific yeast strain which has now multiple different strains related to it, that was essentially put together by DCL, which is now Diageo, and is prevalent in the whiskey industry because it's a very efficient yeast. Essentially, it makes alcohol quickly, which is great for making lots of whiskey quickly. But before that, they would have all been using various types of proprietary yeasts, brewers' yeasts, spent yeast delivered in cask. It could have been anything. And what that means is you tend to get much fruitier beers making fruitier spirits. Fermentation times seem to be, we'll say, inconsistent, sometimes very long, sometimes short. Mainly because distilleries would close sometimes and they just leave all the washbacks full and then come back 3 days later, 4 days later. So you tend to have these longer ferments, often mixed with shorter ferments. And then distillation time, from what I understand in the 60s, tended to be a lot slower. So the whiskies were distilled a lot slower, the distills weren't driven as hard. We're in that point of change as well. So during the 60s, distilleries were moving from coal-fired or direct fire to steam. And so there were changes in terms of production there as well. So this whiskey, for me, incorporates all of that. You are tasting a much slower produced whiskey, a point in time, and a point in Islay time. Islay time is a thing, by the way. The world runs slower on Islay. So it should. It means you get to stay there longer, in my head. But when you think about 60s whiskies, Bunnahabhain, Amor, Lefroy, Ardbeg, I mean, there isn't one of them that isn't spectacular. Braclady, all of those from the 60s through the 70s, all the distilleries on Islay produced these beautifully fruit-driven tropical drams. And this is where Gareth comes in, because he's sitting in Barbados. I mean, this is proper tropical fruit, Gareth. I hope you have some to drink, because this is exactly where you're living. It is all about those mangoes. It's all about those papayas. And for me, there's also a little bit of kind of menthol mint to it as well, which is old wood. So this was all refill wood. For those really geeky people, this is actually sister cask. So there was a very famous whiskey released by Ben Stewart by Bunnahabhain called Old Acquaintance, red label, 1968. It was distilled on the Hogmanay. So was this. So this is sister cask to that. The only difference is that was all first fill sherry. These were all refill sherry butts. We bottled all 5 that we had. We actually vatted all 5 together and recast them into 3 of the butts. So we lost 2 full butts of whiskey. That's 1,000 litres of whiskey in maturation. The alcohol strength is cask strength at 40.8%. Came out of wood at 41%. So the label says 40.8. And Sekinder, when we bottled it, he said to me, "We will never, ever get to bottle a whiskey quite like this again. This will never happen. So we best bottle it and hold on to it." And that's what we've done. It's given me a great excuse to drink this whiskey for 5 years. I'm very happy about that. So thank you again to everybody who lets me drink this yet again. I hope you enjoy it as a last dram. It's truly special. It's not the kind of thing you're going to get to try every day.
Yeah, this is definitely the perfect measure samples are 3 CLs, and we chose 3 because if you're just doing a tasting, you don't need more than a 15, so like half of that. But this is one to make it last. Really, it's definitely a whiskey to sort of savor. It's changing the glass a load since I poured it, and it's just I very rarely get to try this, despite the fact we have a bottle in the office, because Ollie just keeps it under lock and key, and if he doesn't have it, Sekinder's generally squirreled it away in his office. But no, it's properly special whiskey, this. So, a question on the Zoom chat: did the color of the whiskies get darker with each dram? I think they did. I think, we chose the order
Oh, they
well.
did.
Yeah.
That wasn't thought out. It's just the way it ended up. In reality, they've all got older, which I guess makes a difference. And then certainly in terms of 10-year-old, there's sherry in it. But there's none in 28. It's all American oak. And then the last one being refill sherry. Although it's not that dark for 45 years of age.
Yeah, it's got a nice sort of like golden hue to it, but it hasn't gone into that sort of bronzy thing.
One of the nicest things about this whiskey for me, though, is that bear in mind, it's 45 years old, but you're not tasting vast amounts of wood. I mean, there is wood there, but the main character is still distillate. And there's some fantastic examples where if you go back in time and buy, one of the best ones, Bamore, so you try 1960s distilled Bamore, it'll be the best thing you ever drink. I can guarantee it. In fact, it'll be the best thing you ever do. There's not many things more important to me than the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the various other things in the world that are very impressive. But Bamore from the 60s is unreal. That's proper. That's what man was put on this earth to do, was to create that whiskey. But one of the most interesting things is it doesn't have to be 35 or 45 years old. You can try the old 80s dumpy bottles, which are done slightly cheaper, and it still tastes the same. So it's all about the spirit character. And Bunnahabhain's the same. I bet if you were drinking this as a 12-year-old, it would still taste full of fruit, full of character.
Remember, Ollie, the rules we put together, you do not tell people about the cheap 60s Bamore. Relatively cheap. I've got a couple of questions in the room. So first things first, I'm just going to unmute Henry so that he can ask a question. Over to you, sir. Hello, Henry. Oh, no, he's gone quiet. So I shall keep it. Oh, where's he gone? No, we've lost Henry. So, okay. Another question then. I have Andrew. So I will just unmute him. Over to you, Andrew, if you want to say hello. You might have to hit an unmute button yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you to everyone for all the birthday wishes, and what a fantastic way to spend your birthday sitting here sipping this stuff. The question I have, though, on this one is that I was expecting with being in the barrel for that amount of time, there'd be a lot of evaporation and a lot of contact with the wood, and the wood would come through and start to dominate, but it just hasn't. It seems to be the smoothest of all of them, and it was quite a surprise. I didn't know whether it was going to be too woody and too fruity when you first saw it arrive in the box. So, how has that happened?
So it's all about in this case, the style of the wood and the style of the spirit. So these are all refill sherry butts. To put that into context, the whiskey's 45 years old. The casks were just holding on. I reckon the wood was probably as old as 20 years old when it was filled. So these would have been originally filled probably late 40s in reality, maybe early 50s. So that means you don't get all of the kind of character at the start. You don't get all the tannins. You get a much softer, sweeter whiskey, which is why it's aged very well. There has been a lot of evaporation, right? So we'd lost most of it, almost most of it, 1,000 litres over 45 years. So the casks were relatively empty. But it also goes back to that curve. So you get some whiskies definitely hit a point. They get to, say, 50 years of age in first fill wood, and they just become more tannic, more woody, more tannic, more woody. But some whiskies, possibly due to where they're being matured or whatever, the curve is different. So you end up with kind of an uplift. Certainly I feel that's what we got in this. You end up with a slightly fresher flavour. Now the wood in this presents, for me, it presents as that minty note. I don't know if you get that dried mint. And it presents as the dryness in the kind of backbone of the whiskey. But the fruit I talk about is all spirit character. And I think that's probably one of the most important things to note. And that's true of a lot of whiskies from that period, not just Islay. It's also true of Speyside with whiskies like Longmorn. They're dominated by really intense spirit character and essentially chemical compounds that will not go away. I think that's why this has lasted so well. In some ways, it would have been nice to keep it longer. I mean, it is a touch dry, so maybe it was bottled right at the right time. But it was also, from an alcohol point of view, if we left it any longer, it would no longer have been whiskey. And that would have been a sad, sad day. I would have cried quite heavily, I think, if it had ended up being just British plain spirit.
Cheers.
Thank you for the question.
So, Ollie, I have one question from the room as well, from Henry, who I tried to unmute earlier on. When you blend casks, what is your starting point? Do you always have a flavour profile in mind and aim to achieve that? Or do you sometimes determine the cast's characters themselves and then go from them? Which end do you go from?
Both. So, and it completely depends what we're doing. So, Port Askaig, we always have a character in mind. And that dictates a lot of what we look at. The best example I can give you is literally in the last 2 weeks, we've finished blending for the 12-year-old autumn that we're releasing in the autumn, very original name. And that's got a big sherry influence. But to fit in with the style of the whiskey, it can't all be sherry because it would be too heavy, too rich, too much. So I think it's almost, 45% of the blend is refill wood. And that's dictated by the style. So that's definitely working from that end. The flip side is that we have labels like Elements of Islay, where it's more a case of going through stock and working out what works really well together to show you something really, really good. And then we have the rescue casks. And this is some memory I love. It's back in probably about 2013, 14. We were in our old office, and I was still, I was out, I'd just come out of the shop, and I had a really kind of ad hoc job of all sorts of things. I can't really remember what my job title was. It was very random. And I went up to Pitlochry, actually with you, Billy, and we selected casks for Signatory, and I loved that experience. It was the best experience of my life. I still can remember almost every part of that experience, including Tim Forbes peeing into the river. Don't worry, it doesn't go into the whiskey. And I came back, and I remember Sukhinder asked me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, I really like to look after the independent bottling side of our business. Sukhinder being Sukhinder, he said, "Yeah, okay, no problem." And about a day later, he dropped a pile of samples on my desk, and it literally had a note on it, just said, "Fix these." And it had all sorts of stuff in there, and some of it's magical. It had our Rosebank project we've done. It had some Mortlack that we use for Mortlack marriage. And a lot of these casks were not in themselves great. And then we started a project of essentially finding things of similar styles or similar distilleries, in a lot of cases the same distillery, maybe different vintages, and blending them together to find something that we wanted to drink. At the end of the day, we're drinkers. So the fundamental thing is it has to be good to drink. Otherwise, what are we going to drink in the office? That is fundamentally the main aim. What are we going to drink when we're finished?
Right. So, unless anybody else has any more questions, I think we should probably wrap things up. Although I'm going to be sitting around with the 45-year-old for a little bit longer. I feel there is actually my favourite comment of the evening. A comment on Bunnahabhain from Simon in the Zoom chat. It says, "I've been to Bunnahabhain. I saw an otter," which is significantly better than any experience I've had at Bunnahabhain, because I went there and I saw a storm and I saw very wet people who did not want to be there on the end of the island. So, but no. Thank you very much, Simon. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody who's joined us for the tasting. And thanks a lot to you, Oliver, as well for joining us from your front room. And
it's my bedroom, but yeah.
I couldn't work out. You've moved around from the last time I spoke to you.
Yeah.
So, but thanks a lot for joining us. And
thank everybody for listening.
Cool. And thank you much, everybody in the Zoom room. And thank you much, everybody who's watching on Facebook as well. And thanks for joining us for our tasting this evening. We've got loads more tastings coming up. Gareth, my colleague, who is hiding in the room as well. He's very busy. I popped into the office very briefly today, and he was just sat there, just coming up with lists of tastings going into the future. So keep an eye on our blog, on our website. I publish a monthly list of all the different tastings we're doing. We've got loads of ideas going into the future. So we'll have loads of great tastings every Thursday. And if you don't get a pack, come along on a Thursday, join in on Facebook, ask questions, drink your own whiskey while you're doing it. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody, again for watching. And we'll see you next time.